Hello, everybody. My name is Lawrence from Milwaukee Atheists, and today we have another fantastic interview coming up for you. It is David Fitzgerald, author of Nailed and The Mormons. And I have not read The Mormons, but I have read Nailed, and it is great. I recommend it to anybody that is just getting started out in the Mythicist movement, anyone that's interested in learning about it. It is fantastic. It is beautifully written, and it's comedic too. He has a great sense of humor, so I definitely suggest that. And David has a new book coming out, and I think it is getting published very soon. Is that right, David?
That is absolutely right.
It is called The Jesus Mything in Action, and
Mything in Action.
yes.
Yep.
And I have told my friends about it, and they love puns, so it was great.
You come up with a title like that, you sort of have to write the book then.
Oh yeah, definitely. I completely agree. I mean, Nailed. That hit the nail on the head. That was great. It was so simple. It was so elegant.
I can't take credit for that one, but yeah, I agree. I love that title.
That is fantastic. I'm glad that you took that title before somebody else did.
Same here. And the beautiful thing is, Jesus Mything in Action is actually the follow-up book to Nailed. So there's a nice segue there as well.
Oh, great. So is it so it's a continuation then? Is it just like a more in-depth look? Like what are the differences between Nailed and Mything in Action?
That's an awesome question. Nailed itself just lays out the top 10 ways that the Jesus story that we've always been told just fails the reality test. But it doesn't get into really where I think Christianity came from or any of the details about that. And when I wrote the book, I had a chapter in there, Can Jesus Be Saved? And I mentioned all the ways that Christianity and the Bible and the New Testament and just the evolution of Christianity, how different it would look if there really had been a guy named Jesus instead of a mythological figure. And I thought that was enough, but evidently, there's atheists out there who are not down with mythicism, and they're probably sick to death of the topic now. And this book, Jesus Mything in Action, was written for them. This is for all the atheists who've, since Nailed came out, have tried to tell me, oh, but we have great evidence that there was a guy named Jesus, and it's silly to think that there was just no person named Jesus. And it's like, yeah, I get where you're coming from. I used to be exactly like that, but the opposite is true. We do not have good evidence for Jesus, and what little evidence we have is extremely problematic.
So, what comes up normally as this evidence? Because I also hear people talking about, oh, we have this amazing evidence, and anything they list is, I've already heard good refutations of it. So,
Right.
Yeah. So, what comes up the most?
Well, one thing that comes up a lot is, well, how come more biblical historians aren't on board with mythicism? That they like to say there's no biblical historians who are on board with mythicism. That's not quite true at all. But the fact of the matter is I spend a big chunk of book one talking about why it is that biblical scholarship is not on board with mythicism, even secular biblical scholarship. And one of the things that really surprised me is no one had ever done a study on just how much theological interests and that theological Christian bias has over biblical studies. And I wanted to find out, I'd always assumed, rightly enough, it turns out, that the majority of biblical scholars are believers, either Christian, Catholic, you name it, but some form of Christianity. And it turns out, yeah, that's totally true. And not only that, but most of the positions in biblical history are from universities and learning institutions that are theologically aligned. They have an allegiance to a particular denomination, Christian denomination. And that's not even insurmountable. But what the sticking point is you have to ask how many of these biblical scholars have to sign a statement of faith or some kind of creedal statement where they're not just on board with Christianity, but they're contractually obligated to be on board with Christianity. And that's a really huge matter, and we no one had actually done this study, and so part of the value of this book is that we went out, did a study. We did a survey of all the colleges in America that had any kind of New Testament studies, Jesus studies, biblical studies, you name it, and the results were kind of shocking. That not only was it overwhelmingly Christian, but even the ones that had secular scholars working under them, for the most part, these religiously affiliated institutions required their academics to reject mythicism as just part of their statement of faith. And that surprised me a lot. And not only that, but not just the ones that would say that they had a statement of faith, but the ones who would lie about having a statement of faith, and then it would turn out later, after doing some more research, that yes, indeed, they too had a statement of faith. So it became a point of not just about 60% of the religiously aligned colleges and universities required them to reject mythicism, but they were perfectly willing to hide that fact from us.
Yeah, to me that seems, I've heard people try to push for that, saying that, oh, if it was just all these secular people, researching this, it would be, this complete echo chamber. Like, Christians can't even get involved, and it's really strange to me, because it's like, no, you can, like, we can be objective about it. Like, if there is this evidence, it should be, if there's good evidence, as they say there is, it would convince logically thinking people, no matter what their religion is.
Right. And the fact that there are prominent secular historians, and I'm thinking of Bart Ehrman here and other people in his camp, but he's clearly the most famous of that group. It makes atheists think it's reasonable to go along with that mindset, and nothing could be further from the truth. When Bart wrote his book, Did Jesus Exist? When it came out, the mythicists I know, we didn't dislike it because we expected him to agree with us. We disliked it because we thought this was going to be the best defense of the historical position, and instead it just sort of reaffirmed all the things we've been saying about how this is swept under the rug, and people, especially academics who come out against it, or I should say in favor of the mythicist position, they're in danger of losing their jobs. And I documented about a half dozen cases in Jesus Mything in Action of not just atheists, but Christian biblical scholars who have gotten in hot water for saying things that aren't anywhere near as blasphemous as saying Jesus didn't exist.
I mean, what are some examples of that? Like, that's interesting.
Just for instance, saying that the mass zombie resurrection that Matthew talks about when Jesus is crucified, where all the dead holy saints come out of Jerusalem cemetery and appear to many. One biblical scholar said, maybe that's just apocalyptic imagery and not meant to be taken seriously, and he lost his job for that. And there's plenty of other examples like that along those lines.
So was this kind of thing happening like throughout all of biblical scholarship? Like,
well, yeah, and this is the thing, and this isn't new. Another thing that comes out in the book is that this is sort of like the skeleton in the closet, that there are scholars who are totally more on board with mythicism personally than they'll ever be able to admit publicly, and they've said that to people like Richard Carrier. The first time I gave my talk that became the book Nailed at UC Berkeley, there was a Catholic priest, or an Anglican priest, I guess it was, had the collar and everything, sitting in the row, and everything I was saying, he was nodding his head, going, yeah, with this grin on his face. And after I gave the talk, he came up to me and said, they told us all this in seminary in the 40s. I'm going, holy crap! So this is not new stuff at all.
I mean, are these things like changing over time? Like, for example, like if we were to put like some Marcionites on the scene, like, do you think that they would have to take a pledge? Like, I think they would.
Well, the funny thing is, too, is that Christians have been pointing out that the quest for Jesus, they've separated into three major quests for the last 100 years or so. And the first quest, the second quest, the third quest. And all these quests have ended with them throwing up their hands and saying, wait, this isn't working. This stuff that we've been saying as a tool to say whether Jesus really said it or did it, that doesn't work. It doesn't hold up. And these are Christians who are saying this. They believe there was a Jesus. They believe in God and they're believers, but they acknowledge that the tools that we have completely failed. And so they keep going back to square one. And we're just getting out of what's the so-called third quest. And now we're no closer to finding out, to pinning down what Jesus really was like or what he really said or really did than we were when we started 100 years ago. And for a scientific field, that's crazy. That's amazing academic embarrassment that we don't have any firmer idea on who Jesus was. And that should be a hint and a half that there's something very wrong with our subject matter.
Yeah, I think more so because I mean something like that is very hard to prove. To prove that a specific person, someone like Jesus, would have existed. It is hard to prove, but it's very possible, especially for someone as influential.
And
Go ahead.
well, here's the thing. I mean, Bart Ehrman makes the point that there's no contemporary attestation for him outside of his own cult. And that's not really unusual for first century, religious figures from Judea. The problem is we have all these other events that are tied to early Christianity that would have been noticed if Christianity was real, even if a non-miraculous, non-miracle working Christianity was true, and it was just a failed apocalyptic prophet. There's still problems with even the mundane aspects of his bibliography that usually just get accepted at face value.
I mean, what are the other things that should have happened? Like, at least one of them?
Well, first of all, just the fact that he was an apocalyptic prophet and yet somehow was killed by the Romans for being that makes no sense. And Bartimer has made the point that most of the reconstructed secular Jesuses that we have, he was a Hasidic rabbi, he was a first century magician, he was this, he was that. None of them make sense of why the Romans would give a rat's ass and kill him, or why the Jews wouldn't just stone him to death for blasphemy, if he was this, that, or the other. But the fact is, nothing he says in the Gospels constitutes blasphemy. It wasn't blasphemous to call yourself the Messiah. There was a revolution about 50 years after the New Testament is written, where a Jew rose up and declared himself the Messiah, and that was no problem at all. Even being an apocalyptic prophet wasn't against the law, or being a failed prophet wasn't against the law.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and when you go through Jesus's life story, and we do that in the new book, actually, you come across point after point after point after point that couldn't possibly happen, especially when you get to Jesus's trial. Nothing in that trial makes sense, and it would have been thrown out any number of times through there. The other thing that you find throughout Jesus's story, especially in the book of Mark, the first gospel in which all the other gospels were based upon, is that everything seems to be a trope taken from the Old Testament. It's taken from the Hebrew scriptures and turned into a story of a guy, but it has all the earmarks of being an allegory, a theological allegory.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. Like when I was reading through On the Historicity of Jesus, Carrier points that out, and I was like, wow, I've never even looked at it that way. It was really mind-blowing. I think that there are a lot of really cool parallels between Ezekiel and Luke's Jesus, actually.
Sure, and you can find the same kind of thing with as a new Joshua, as a new Moses, as a new Adam, as an Elijah. There's all these different parallels that keep popping up.
Yeah, it's just nothing that you would expect to see in real life. Like, that's how mythology works.
Exactly. And it's funny you mentioned that because one thing we also go to is what's called the Raglan rank scale of mythological characters, where folklorists have gone into mythology and come up with these overarching tropes that you see in mythological characters. And then they compared famous people like Moses, like King Arthur, like Robin Hood, all the way down to like Julius Caesar and King David, for instance, Alexander the Great. And what they found was there's around 22 of the criteria. None of them are meant to correspond to all of the mythological characters, but all the mythological characters correspond to a large number of that. And real people that they've tested this on only come up to about, a 5 or a 6 at best. 7 in Alexander the Great's case, maybe, if you count, this or that. But none of them even go into the double digits. And yet, when you compare Jesus to these guys, not only is he in the double digits, but he's one of the highest scorers. He's a 20 out of a 21. He's like number 2 up there with Theseus and Moses, just behind Odysseus, as being this perfectly mythological character.
Yeah, that is really incredible, because I would think that throughout human history, because my brain tells me there have been so many people. I mean, it's like I think that there are 15 people dead for every person that's alive today. I think that's the actual number. Maybe it's a little bit higher now, but you'd think that maybe at least one of these real people will hit that will hit that that high number. So I'm thinking that although it is, I think that the most that shows obviously is that the story is, there's obviously something wrong with the story. The story is mythological.
And that's a good point. Yeah. And most atheists won't argue with that these stories are mythological.
Well, yeah, obviously.
What the objection I get is, we know those stories are mythical. We know that the Gospels are myths about Jesus. And that's not really controversial across the board in secular circles. And once you get Christians in on the argument, it's a whole new thing. Then you got to drag them kicking and screaming just to get to that point. But once you accept that the Gospels are mythological, it doesn't necessarily follow that Jesus is mythological too. But the problem that we face is, as Robert Price points out, that for all extents and purposes, even if there was a real Jesus, there's not one any longer, because everything that we know about this guy who supposedly lived in the first century comes from these writings that have nothing to do with anyone who actually lived ever. All our Gospels ultimately boil down to the Gospel of Mark. And before the Gospel of Mark is written, the early Christians worship a very different Jesus, a very mythological, a very high Christological figure who's not related to anyone real at all, who even was supposed to have been on earth. And not just in Paul's writing, but in all the Christian writings that we get before the Gospels, like the book of Hebrews, like the epistles that come before the Gospels.
Yeah, I was actually just about to mention the Paul's writings, because I at least know from Paul's writings that the forgeries are very different than the authentic ones in the way they talk about God.
Sure. And it's funny that even in the forgeries, there's giveaways that they're not really talking about a person who was supposed to have existed at the time, which is interesting. The book of the Hebrews, for instance, it's not a forgery, but it gives a Jesus who's so different from the Jesus of the Gospels. It's like, that's probably the Jesus of Paul, is this mythological figure who's doing everything in heaven and is constantly compared back and forth between the way things are happening in heaven and the way the priests do them on earth. And the priest Melchizedek, who was in the Old Testament, this figure that had no parents, no birth and no death. They're comparing this mythological character to Jesus as a mythological character.
Yeah, it comes up a lot. Do you know who Venom Fang X is? Have you ever heard of him?
Name vaguely rings a bell. Is a YouTube guy.
Yeah, yeah, he's a YouTube guy. Like back in the day, like he would make a lot of. He was like the super Christian guy, super Christian,
Oh, I gotcha.
creationist, like young Earth,
Oh,
ridiculous stuff.
special.
Um,
Special.
yeah, right. Him and people like Thunderfoot and people like the Amazing Atheist. Like back in the day, they would like make a bunch of response videos to each other, and it was this big fight, and like there were some other guys involved. It was I loved it. I thought it was great. Like early days of YouTube, that was fantastic for me. But uh, basically, there was a point where Venom Fang X sat down with the Amazing Atheist, and they were having a debate, like an actual debate. It was the first time that has ever happened. It was a YouTube event, like 7, 8 years in the making. But in it, he said that Jesus has all these mythological things to him because he was meant to be, because he's the Lamb, and then he points to like the Old Testament where he was like, okay, what's his name in the Abraham and Isaac story?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where the kid is saved by the lamb, and then he says like, oh, that was obviously allegory or like prophetic
Prefiguring.
of Jesus,
Yeah.
and I'm like, what? No, that just shows how mythological it is.
And C.S. Lewis said the same thing. He said, "Oh, well, the difference with Jesus is Jesus was myth made fact." It's like, really, Yeah, so you're not denying that there's all these, similarities to all these other clearly mythological figures, but it's like in Jesus's case, because we know he was real. Bingo. It's just the wishful thinking is just unreal. It's off the chart.
Yeah, I think it's very intriguing how people will jump through these loopholes to try to show like how writings of people like Josephus and Tacitus, how they are to be trusted. I mean, I
Don't start it on those guys.
Yeah,
Because even atheists do this. They constantly bring up people like Suetonius and Tacitus as proof of a real Jesus, and it's like, dude, no, that nothing could be further from the truth.
let's see what we have for questions from Mythicist Milwaukee. For all the viewers out there, if you have not been to the Mythicist Milwaukee channel or the Mythicist Milwaukee Facebook page, go check that out. We do a lot of stuff. You will enjoy it. One person asks about any academic changes across the country since your last book.
Well, actually, there have been a few. Raphael Lasseter in Australia is getting his degree, and he's probably the first openly mythicist academic who's actually had a paper published in an academic journal. No, I take that back. I'm sure Richard Carrier has too in Sheffield's journal too. So things are the first cracks are starting to show on that front. There's a lot of simmering beneath the surface that's going on. The cracks are showing in the arguments that we've always been told were just long established facts. That bluff is starting to go away slowly but surely. Philip Davis, the emeritus professor at Sheffield University, did a great response to Bart Ehrman's "Did Jesus Exist?", where he said something to the effect of, well, surely the weight of Jesus, it's not unreasonable to take the scant evidence we have and weigh it to see if it holds water, because we can't say that. Of course there was a Jesus, because for one thing, we can't agree on who Jesus was. And it's obvious that not all the Jesuses that have been proposed could possibly be real. So what does it mean to say that Jesus definitely existed? And that's a guy who thinks that Jesus did exist, but has no problem accepting that there's good reason for doubt. And that's a point I like to make to other atheists. Is like, this is not a fight between the mythicists and the atheists. This is a fight between people who take myth theory seriously, right or wrong, and those who just dismiss it out of hand. And I'll be the first to say that if good evidence turns up that overturns everything that I've come up in these last 3 books, everything that Richard Carey has come up with on the historicity of Jesus. I mean, that's a big encyclopedia worth of evidence we need to overturn. But if that happened, I'd be the first to say, okay, yeah, I guess there was a guy named Jesus. And it wouldn't make me any less happy of an atheist. It's not like Christianity is going to start making sense if Jesus turned out to be a failed apocalyptic prophet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like
But
not like all of a sudden all that other shit makes sense.
exactly. And it's not like I get any pleasure out of being a contrarian or being, the guy out on the periphery saying, the emperor has no clothes. It's just, there was a great Seth MacFarlane meme that says, I'm not an atheist because I want to be a dick about it. It's just that's the way it looks to me. And that's how I feel about mythicism. It's like, yeah, it's not like I have anything invested in it, really. It's just that seems the most logical course given our evidence.
Exactly. And I think, people misunderstand the mythicist movement and especially the atheist movement, because a lot of people think atheists are, not even like taking into account the crazies who think that we worship Satan and stuff. But they think that we believe that God doesn't exist. And while there are some that do, that's not, atheism as a whole. We just don't believe that he does. And it's very hard for me to try to...
And we have little in common with each other other than that, for the most part.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's really the one thing holding us together.
Exactly.
You are in the Batman and Jesus movie.
I sure am.
Yes, Mythicist Milwaukee is collaborating with, I forgot, what is it, Three Kings Towers, I think that's the name of them. And
sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's the guy who plays Father Joseph on the Holy Shit series. Yep, that's his group, his company, his production team. He does very good work. And I am excited for this movie. Are you excited?
I gotta tell you, I so am too. I cannot wait for this movie to come out.
Yeah, because I mean, we've been talking about it for so long, and I cannot wait to see how it turns out. Now
the world premiere is going to be in October. Is that right, in Milwaukee?
I think it's in October. I was actually just looking up the exact date and time, but it is going to be at the Pabst Theater, which is huge.
Nice.
Like, that is awesome. Like, I don't know how much you know about Milwaukee, but the Pabst Theater is like huge. It's like right up there in big venues like the Bradley Center.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it is really fantastic that we are that we are going there for our conference.
Yeah, I can't wait. That's going to be brilliant.
Yep, the Myth Information Conference, I just looked it up. It is going to be on September 30th, 2017 at 10 a.m., pretty much running all day, full day event, and it's going to be at the Pabst Theater.
Nice.
I cannot wait. We're going to have a big debate there. We're going to have the movie premiere. It's going to be fantastic, and obviously yours truly will be there. And David,
me too.
You're going to be there. Awesome, fantastic.
Can't wait.
All right, now we got that out of the way. David, why should atheists even give a crap about Jesus existing or not?
That's a great question, because so many atheists roll their eyes when mythicist gets brought up at all. But the point of it is, and this is something that's of value to everybody, not even just atheists, but whatever side comes out in this argument, whether Jesus existed or didn't, everything we learn in the back and forth gives us a feeling of how much we can know about what Jesus really said and really did, and how much room for doubt there is, so that you can call the bluff of anybody who tries to tell you that they know how Jesus would have you think or behave or vote. And that's a huge thing for all atheists to know.
I completely agree with that. I mean, like, I am in favor of doing Bible studies. I think they are very important to having these kinds of discussions. And I mean, in my life, these kinds of discussions are pretty important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're fun. I mean, an atheist Bible study, you can into so much more than you would as a Christian Bible study. yeah, it's brilliant.
It is a lot of fun, and I've been thinking once I get back to Milwaukee, I might start a series. So a little bit of spoiler here. I might start a series where I actually we open up the Bible from page one. It's gonna be me and maybe one or two other guys, and whoever is in Milwaukee Atheists at the time that wants to do this, and we are going to go over in great detail
Oh dear.
about the Bible, how it's written, any important scholarship that's been done on those things. Like, we're going to do it story by story.
That
So
would
we're
be
not even
nice.
going to do chapter by chapter. It's story by story.
That's not a bad plan. And just finding out where these stories come from and just all the threads that went into them. I mean, we'll probably never be able to pick away all the evolution of Christianity, but even what we already know is just kind of mind-blowing to see how far it goes back and how many different threads go off into all these other different religions and different countries and cultures.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. I mean, that's one of the reasons I started the Mythstery series, because so many of these myths, it doesn't matter if they're older or newer, they share a lot of similarities to
Oh,
religions
for
that
sure.
exist today. So it shows this progression. It's evolution in action of
Yeah,
ideas. It's
yeah.
fantastic.
And the more we find about yeah, absolutely. The more we find out about different Mesopotamian cultures from that same period, Bronze Age, the more we see that, oh, yeah, okay, that's where they got that story. Or, you can see the evolution of these stories through different cultures,
Yeah,
like the Noah story, like the Garden of Eden story.
absolutely. Yeah, the Noah story, that's a big one. With what's his name? I forgot his name. Zeus Sudra. That
Uh,
was the Sumerian Noah.
Zeus and Utnapishtim and all these different. I mean, our Noah stories. I think the seventh or eighth in a line of about 9 different versions that we've come across so far. And they just came across one, like, I think a year or two ago, that was another different version of the same story.
Really? And it was older than.
Yeah. Almost all of the ones we found are old, that predate the Noah story.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look into that. I think it's important. Moving off of your point about why you think it's important for atheists to be interested in this stuff. I think it's important because when I first started researching this stuff, there's a lot of when I was first introduced to mythicism, it was how everyone pretty much gets introduced to mythicism. It was through that zeitgeist. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was when I was much younger, and I didn't even look into it. I didn't bother fact checking it, and then I started doing this, and I was like, oh, there's so much more I didn't know. I don't want to suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect, so
Right.
I have a bunch of books on my table about similar things to this. I have some Bart Ehrman books on forgeries and
Excellent book.
yeah, I
Excellent.
agree. I love those books of his. Those are absolutely fantastic.
It's so funny. Bart is such a staunch historicist, and yet he's one of the best mythicists out there. It's like, come on, you're sitting on a tree branch you sawed off years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I have his book sitting here. I have on the historicity of Jesus. I also got some books on Gnosticism. I love this kind of stuff. I mean,
Well, I can't wait for you to read Jesus Mything in Action, because you are going to love it. I say it, but it's really, I don't know if I told you this or not, but it's actually 3 books in one. Because when when I was done writing it, it was about 900 pages. And so I had a talk with my audiobook engineer, and he was saying, so how many pages what's the word count? Wait, really? And what's the page count again? And I said, oh, it's about 560. And he says, oh, wait a second. Is that 8.5 by 11 or is that 6 by 9? And I went, oh, no. And so, yeah, my 500 book, which is kind of big, turned out to be almost 900 pages. So now it's 3 books, Jesus Mything in Action, Volume 1, 2, and 3. they're worth reading. It's not some big huge tome. On the History of Jesus is awesome, but this is not even anywhere near as tough a read as that or your average Robert Price book. It's a fun read. It's like Nailed. It's tries to keep things tight and simple and fun and accessible. And the book 3, volume 3 of it is a time travel expedition through the origins and evolution of Christianity. So it's super fun.
Ooh, that does sound fun. That kind of reminds me, and I am going to also plug myself here. I don't really care. It's my channel. I can do what I want. No, we are starting a series, and I'm undecided on the Bible series yet, but I'm starting a series when I get back to Milwaukee. It's going to be called Christian Space Adventures. We are telling the Christian stories from the perspective of aliens. Like we're going to dress up like aliens. We're going to put, those fake antenna on us. Like obviously it looks terrible. That's the point. And these aliens are going to crash land into Earth, and they are actually the meteor that killed all the dinosaurs. And they have to rebuild everything, and then they come back 265 million years later, and there are people here, and then the Bible starts.
You probably know this, but no joke, the original TV show Battlestar Galactica was basically a Mormon wanting to do Bible stories in space. No joke.
Really?
No joke at all. Yeah, that's why it's Commander Adam, and all the other. Kobol is actually the planet Kolob. It's totally beefed up Mormonism for outer space.
Wow, I did not know that.
That's why you need to read the book, the Mormon book.
That blew my mind.
These are the fun facts you learn in Dave Fitzgerald books.
All right, and I think this is going to be the last question before I move on to more pressing matters. How do you think the Mythicist movement should go about continuing in discussions and scholarship and all that tedious crap?
Right. Well, I think the thing that needs to happen the most in the current debate is the rhetoric has to be ratcheted down, and we need to, on both sides, stop worrying about the personality clashes. Cough, Richard Carrier and Bart Ehrman.
Yeah, that one.
That's the most obvious because it's the most it's the most visible. And just pay attention to what the arguments are. And I like the fact that there's historicists out there who are willing to say, well, yeah, it might be true, might not be. I don't think it's true, but let's weigh the evidence. And until secular, it's only going to happen in secular circles. That's the other thing we need to worry about. We're never going to get the Society of Biblical Literature to come on board with this. They start their meetings with prayer. They're not going to do anything about mythicism, and recognize the fact that as long as there's any such thing as biblical studies, it's always going to be dominated by Christian interests, and that's just the way it is. We need to just continue, just like Raphael Lataster said, and said this is an argument amongst atheists, and leave it at that.
I just think it's that it's really sad that it kind of comes off as echo chambery. Obviously there's no way to fix that issue because their beliefs are rooted in the fact that there was this guy named Jesus.
Right. They're not going anywhere. Whereas we at least have the option to at least entertain a relaxed agnosticism about the thing. We can say, I don't know, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. It doesn't matter to me. They can't do that. We don't need Jesus to be a myth, but they need Jesus to not have been a myth. And so there's no give on that. One of the points I make in the book is that evolution, as scared as Christians are about evolution, this is even scarier because they can twist their faith to make room for evolution. But mythist theory, if it's right, and I think it is right, that's kryptonite for Christianity. It's over.
I mean, you say that, but then I'm sure that people will find a way to, look at the moral of the story and stuff like that. Like,
And you're not wrong. And there's Christians who are out there who said, yeah, I don't care if Jesus was real or not. I still would be a Christian. And it's like, hey, more power to you. I couldn't do that as a Christian. It's like when I first realized there was no God, it's like, yeah, I'm out. I'm sorry, I'm out. But that's what it's going to take. It's going to be that level of sea change. And that's, to be honest with you, I think Christianity is going to go away first before mythicism, Jesus mythicism, becomes mainstream. I don't know if that'll ever happen. I think people will lose interest in Christianity first because that's already well on its way.
oh yeah, definitely. That is definitely a trend that's been going on for a few decades now.
Yeah, and one of the problems with mythicism is that increasingly the only sources of biblical studies departments are at Christian universities, which makes it all the more harder for mythicism to be taken seriously.
Yeah, it's really sad that makes it so difficult. I mean, that's why. I mean, like I've been doing what I've been doing. I've been researching all this stuff. I've been going out of my way to look into scholarship, and I've been reading this stuff by myself and seeing, is there something else that doesn't make sense? I'm trying to learn as much as possible. I'm even trying to learn Greek too, just so I can do this.
Fair play to you. I've been trying to do it myself, and yeah, it's not easy, is it?
It's not.
Yeah.
It is a fun language, though. I like it. Although it is, some words are pronounced not how I would expect that they would be pronounced.
Right.
It's very
like those have a different word for everything.
Yeah, seriously. All right, and I think the last and most pressing matter that we can discuss is an excerpt from your book. If there is anything you would like to read, this would be the best sneak preview that has ever existed of all time.
Oh, no. How much time do we have? Because it's a big-ass book.
We have as much time as you need.
All right, I'm just going to read the preface, if that's okay with you.
That is totally fine.
Here we go. This is the preface to Jesus Mything in Action by David Fitzgerald. It's volume 1. And here we go. Jesus Mything in Action is the follow-up to my 2010 book, Nailed, 10 Christian Myths That Show Jesus Never Existed at All. In Nailed, I pointed out the top 10 ways the traditional story of Jesus simply doesn't hold up, and how our evidence for Christianity's origin point to a Jesus who is an allegorical figure, a theological and literary construct. In other words, a purely mythical Christ. In the concluding chapter of Nailed, I asked, can Jesus be saved? And discussed how different our evidence would need to be if there was even a merely mortal Jesus. But that was all that needed to be said, or so I thought. But it soon became apparent that there were still many questions left unanswered. Where did Christianity come from if there was no Jesus? Why do so many biblical scholars, even secular ones, oppose Jesus myth theory? Are all Jesus myth theories viable? What is our evidence for Jesus? So here to help with those and more questions is Jesus Mything in Action. I plan this to be both a follow-up to Nailed and the second book in the Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion series. But 4 years, nearly 250,000 words, and several discussions with my audiobook engineer later, it became apparent that at around 900 pages, it would have to be 3 books instead. I'm just as surprised as you are to discover that I just gave birth to triplets, and I thank you in advance for your understanding at why a 3-part book has been shoehorned into an ongoing series. Here's what you're in for. In Volume 1, Chapters 1 through 12, we look at the myths of Jesus mythicism, what it is and isn't, what biblical scholars are saying about it and why, and critically examine our oldest biographical source for Jesus, the Gospel of Mark. In Volume 2, Chapters 13 through 18, we discuss the construction and deconstruction of the Gospels, how Jesus is presented in the rest of the New Testament, and examines the historical sources for Jesus outside of the Bible. In Volume 3, Chapters 19 through 25, we engage in a bold thought experiment, a multi-chapter time travel expedition through the origin and evolution of Christianity. I call it The Gospel According to H.G. Wells. I hope you enjoy it, and I really hope you do, and I think you will. I'm actually really excited about this book. I think it will probably wind up being the most important book I've ever written, before or since. Sooner, a little farther down the line, I'll get started on the next book in the series, and that's going to be the Sex and Violence in the Bible book, and that's going to be a lot of fun. So Yeah, everybody
Sounds
who's still
interesting.
not on board, everybody who's still not on board with mythicism is still going to love the next book in the series.
All right. So that would be all the time we have. Thank you for that preface, Gerald. Thank you for that sneak preview. That was fantastic. I loved it. And I sure hope that for 900 pages, you make it way bigger than you are. I'm sure it's going to be too much for you to handle. You're going to have so much money. I sure hope that's what happens.
From your mouth to God's ear.
All right. Thank you, David, again. And thank you, everybody, for watching. David, do you have any last plugs?
Buy that book, and I'll see you guys in Milwaukee this fall for the premiere of Jesus and Batman.
All right. Thank you. Be sure you guys subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.